Everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are going to build your political science analytical toolkit. Now, if you're sitting in this undergraduate lecture right now, you are probably trying to figure out the ultimate question in our field. Why do some democracies absolutely thrive while others completely fail? I mean, why is political participation sky high in one society, but practically non-existent in another? Well, we answer those kinds of questions using comparative politics. And today, we're going to look at the exact framework scholars use to make sense of the wild, complex political world around us. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's take a really quick look at our syllabus for today. We'll be covering the traditional lens, behavior versus systems, functions and economy, modern theories, and finally, we'll wrap it all up in the final analysis.
So let's jump straight into Section 1, the traditional lens, looking at the early methods. Think back to before World War II. The traditional approach essentially treated political scientists like legal scholars who were focused purely on formal institutions. For instance, a traditional scholar might do a case study comparing executive accountability. They'd contrast how the Indian Prime Minister can be ousted by a sudden vote of no confidence in Parliament against the super-rigid fixed-term separation of powers that shields the US President. But here is the catch with this approach. Reading a rulebook doesn't actually tell you how the players behave on the field when the referee isn't looking. It completely misses informal institutions and everyday, on-the-ground political behavior.
Which brings us to Section 2, Behavior versus Systems, and the massive post-World War II changes.
Because that traditional lens missed so much of reality, scholars after the Second World War pivoted hard to focus on actual human action. And this sparked two really fascinating, contrasting reactions. On one hand, you have the behavioral approach, championed by scholars like Gabriel Almond. This zooms all the way into the individual, using surveys and statistics to figure out how regular people actually form opinions and vote. On the other hand, you have David Easton's systems approach, which zooms all the way out. Rather than studying isolated voters, the systems approach looks at the macro level. It examines how the government as a whole digests those individual actions to maintain stability. It's kind of like the difference between using a microscope and a telescope.
Let's actually map out that systems approach so you can see exactly how policy feedback works in real time. Imagine the public starts demanding better job opportunities. Those demands enter the political machine as inputs. The system processes them and churns out outputs, like, say, a massive government employment scheme. But the cycle doesn't just stop there. Citizens evaluate that policy. Was it fair? Did it actually work? That evaluation creates feedback, which loops right back around as a brand new input. This constant, never-ending loop is exactly how political systems adapt and survive.
Moving right along to Section 3, Functions and Political Economy, exploring the underlying drivers.
Expanding our toolkit a bit further, we find the structural functional approach. Gabriel Almond realized that comparing a highly developed democracy with a developing nation using a traditional rulebook was literally impossible because their institutions looked completely different. So he argued that every single system must perform essential functions to survive, regardless of what its institutions look like. They must express public demands, which we call interest articulation. They must group those demands together, which is interest aggregation. And they have to make, apply, and adjudicate rules. Whether that's being done by a formal political party in a capital city or a traditional tribal leader in a rural village, the structure changes, but the core function remains exactly the same.
Alternatively, we have the political economy, or Marxist approach. And this perspective basically tells us to follow the money. Influenced by Karl Marx, this approach argues that state policies and political institutions are fundamentally shaped by underlying class relations and economic structures. From this viewpoint, you simply cannot understand politics without examining who holds the economic power. Laws and public policies aren't just neutral, objective rules, they often directly reflect the interests of economically dominant groups. Now, while critics will argue this gives way too much weight to economics over things like culture or ideology, it's still an absolutely invaluable tool for highlighting issues of inequality, exploitation, and power dynamics in any given society.
All right, Section 4, Modern Theories, where we start bridging the gap.
So, we've looked at the extremes, right? Pure rules versus pure behavior. Well, modern theories try to bridge that gap. And the neo-institutional approach does exactly this. It is a massive upgrade from the old traditional method because it doesn't just study dry constitutional text. It examines how institutions actually influence behavior. It looks at formal institutions, like legislatures, sure, but critically it also looks at informal, unwritten norms and traditions. It reveals how the specific rules of an electoral system can literally dictate how people vote and how political parties build their campaigns. The rules themselves actually shape the behavior.
Meanwhile, we have the rational choice approach. This framework applies strict economic reasoning to politics. It assumes that individuals, whether we're talking about voters, politicians, or party leaders, are fundamentally rational actors. It says we are constantly making decisions by weighing the costs and benefits to maximize our own personal interests. Voters pick candidates that serve them best, politicians do whatever it takes to win elections. It's a genuinely great tool for explaining coalition politics and policymaking. However, critics are always quick to remind us that humans are not robots, right? Human decisions often completely defy pure logic and are deeply influenced by emotion, culture, and ideology.
Finally, Section 5, the final analysis, putting together a unified theory.
Because no single framework holds all the magic answers, we have to combine these distinct perspectives into a unified understanding. Comparative politics isn't just about memorizing constitutions. By systematically comparing institutions, looking at the feedback loops of processes, analyzing rational and emotional behavior, and studying economic outcomes, we develop much broader, more useful theories. Each approach gives us a distinct piece of the puzzle that, when you put it all together, helps us truly explain political change in our contemporary world.
So, before you pack up your notes and leave this lecture, I want to challenge you with this. Take these tools out into the real world. Looking at your own government today, right now, which of these lenses best explains your political reality? Is it the systems approach, constantly processing public demands, the political economy approach, driven by who holds the economic power, or rational choice actors simply maximizing their own benefits? Think critically about it. Until next time, keep analyzing, and thank you so much for joining me.